chose was Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury.
He was born in Waukegan, Illinois on August 22nd, 1920, and a lengthy illness killed him June 5th, 2012. His father is Leonard Spalding Bradbury. His mother is Esther Marie Moberg Bradbury. He had 3 siblings. His 2 older brothers were twins, but one died before birth, and his younger sister died in infancy when he was 7. In 1947, he married Margaret McClure. They had 4 children, Bettina, Alexandra, Susan, and Ramona. Their marriage ended in 2003 when Margaret passed away. Ray graduated Los Angeles High School in 1938. He was turned down by the military because he had bad eyesight. He then became a student of life, selling newspapers on the street corners until 1942. He became a full-time writer in 1943, where he spent his time at the library using a typewriter. He began with short stories and periodicals. His reputation was established with the publication of The Martian Chronicles in 1950. Next came The Illustrated Man, and then in 1953, Fahrenheit 451, which many consider to be his masterpiece. He has published over 30 books and close to 600 short essays and numerous poems, essays, and plays. His work has been included in 4 Best American Short Story collections. He has been awarded the O. Henry Memorial Award, the Benjamin Franklin Award, the World Fantasy Award for Lifetime Achievement, the Grand Master Award from the Science Fiction Writers of America, the Penn Center USA West Lifetime Achievement Award.
Alright, so key characters. Guy Montag, he is a fireman. He realizes the emptiness in his life, and he searches for a meaning in books as he is supposed to be burning them, and he wants a better relationship with his wife, but he's not the typical fireman that you would think of. He goes and he burns the books and the buildings that they're found in, so he does the opposite of what we think of a fireman as. Clarice McKellen, she is a 17-year-old girl. She neighbors with Guy Montag, and she makes Montag rethink his life. She's a socialist, and she gets hit by a car and passes early on in the novel. Beatty, he is captain of Montag's fire department, and he hates books and the people that want to read them.
So Mildred Montag, and that's Guy Montag's wife, and she's obsessed with watching TV. She often refuses to engage in conversation with her husband about their marriage, and she doesn't even acknowledge her own suicide attempt early in the book. Faber is a professor, and he loves books, and he helps Montag when he comes to the realization that he loves books. He communicates through an earpiece, which is called the seashell in the novel. Granger, he is known as the Book People leader, and the Book People, they're introduced towards like the end of the novel, which is in the third part, and they're self-proclaimed what they call themselves as hobo intellectuals. And Montag, he meets them in the country, which after a chain of events, which we will discuss later. Granger is like known as smart, confident, patient, and he wants to preserve literature throughout the ongoing dark age that's going on right now. The setting is never really clear, it's just in like the modern United States. And Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles are Mildred's friends. Mrs. Phelps is very emotionally isolated. Her emotions are very out of sync. Like for example, when Montag reads a poem, she cries, but is very unconcerned when her husband goes off to war. And Mrs. Bowles is known as a typical member of society in the novel, and she has 2 children that hate her, and she does not care about her life. And she was married 3 times. One ended in a nasty divorce, one husband was killed in an accident, and one committed suicide. And Stoneman and Black are Montag's co-workers. They don't really do much, they're just mentioned.
Key symbols. So the phoenix, it's a bird that is consumed by flames but then rises from ashes. The Granger makes a comparison between human beings and the phoenix after the city is in ashes from the bombers. And it is also a symbol for renewal. The hearth and the salamander, it's the title of the first section of the novel. Both words can be associated with fire. A hearth is known as a fireplace, so it gives warmth in your home. And the people once believed that salamanders could live in fire without being harmed. And then this is why the firemen wore salamanders on their uniforms in the novel. And they also called the fire truck the salamander. The Sieve in the Sand, it's the title of the second section of the novel, and it refers to one of Montag's childhood memories. The sand represents new knowledge, and the sieve represents the knowledge that he is trying to retain while memorizing different things. And then fire symbolizes destruction. 451 degrees is the point when paper and books will begin to burn. And it can also symbolize knowledge when it is controlled.
So key themes. The first one is censorship and very free in the censorship, like competing forms of media, which is when people started losing interest in books after competing forms of media started popping up, like TV and radio. Bradbury also suggested that people had little time to concentrate and focus because they were overstimulated. From like fast cars, music, and advertisements. And then from overpopulation and so much published material, people liked condensed books more. And then this also caused hostility towards books because people didn't like feeling inferior to those who've read more than they had. And then the biggest one for censorship is small minority groups. What? Okay. Some minority groups disliked books that offended them, but it wasn't necessarily like racial groups. It was more like small interest groups like cat lovers and dog lovers, but offended by cat books and dog books. The next one is knowledge and ignorance, and fireman's duty is to destroy destroy knowledge, which is books, and promote ignorance, and it's used to, and we want to use it to make a unified nation. And then there's religion. Bradbury used religious imagery to show the unholy qualities in Montauk society. If you oppose ignorance and book burning, you do it in the language of Christianity, which is like forgiveness. And fire in the Bible means heresy and divinity. In Fahrenheit 451, fire is also contradictory. At the beginning of the novel, fire was a restrictive weapon of society, and Montag uses it to burn Beatty and win his freedom. And then the last key theme is animal imagery. And in the beginning of the novel, they were burning book pages, and they look like birds trying to fly away. Montag also compares the tool used to save Mildred's life to like a snake. The animal imagery is used to show the importance of nature in life, and the lack of or the manipulation of nature only cause death and destruction. The mechanical hound, which we'll talk about more later. And at the end of the novel, a deer is shown, and it's used to show peace and beauty, and it welcomes Montag to a new point in his life.
Bradbury's comment on society, he insists that his novel is not just about censorship, but about how television destroyed people's interest in reading literature. And he also says it's not a response to Senator Joseph McCarthy, which was a senator from Wisconsin from 1947 up until he passed away 10 years later. I didn't get to read much about Joseph McCarthy, but he was a very feared, powerful man. And Bradbury simply says that people are being turned into morons by TV.
What makes Fahrenheit 451 a dystopian novel? Dystopia is an imaginary place where everything is as miserable and horrific as it could be for the citizens. The book takes place in a future time where you aren't allowed to own or read books. If you are, you get caught by the firemen. They come and set your whole entire house on fire. Montag's wife Mildred was always watching her show, The Family. She becomes so into the show because her TV is the entire wall. It's called a wall TV. She has three wall-to-wall TVs, and through the book, she is begging Montag for the fourth. This ruins human communication skills, and it shows technology is taking over our lives. The mechanical hound is another futuristic thing. It's a metal dog that hunts and kills those who own and read books, used by firemen. When Montag gets caught with reading books, the hound comes to his house, and it's like a sign before the rest of the firemen show up. This dystopia is a society where both the ruling class of firemen and citizens heavily depend on technology.
So, part one of the novel, The Heart of the Salamander. Guy Montag, the main character, believed that it was a pleasure to burn books. He liked seeing things eaten by the flames and enjoyed watching them burn. After he gets back to his fire station, Montag meets Clarice McClellan on his walk home. Out of curiosity, he talks with her and asks she asks if he's ever read any of the books he's burned, which is against the law to even read or own books. and asked if firemen ever put out the fires instead of starting them. Montag decided to just keep going home and didn't really think about what she was saying. And once Montag gets to his bedroom, he finds it dark and quiet. He pulls out a lighter and finds his wife Mildred sprawled out after overdosing on sleeping pills. Two operators come in with a snake-like machine used to clean out Mildred's stomach. In the morning, Montag finds Mildred awake and lively, not remembering the events of the night before. On Montag's way to work, he meets with Clarice again, and he starts to realize that he doesn't love Mildred as much as he thought he did. Once Montag gets to work, he tries to avoid the mechanical hound, which is used to help firemen catch people with books, and it doesn't seem to like Montag very much. For days, Montag's routine continued as normal until one day the station gets a call about a woman with books. The firemen go to her house and burst through the front door and started hurling magazines and books out of hiding. And almost with a mind of its own, Montag's hand grabs a book and hides it underneath his jacket. And after throwing all the books, the woman still wouldn't leave her house and decided to run along with her books instead of going to jail. Later on, when they were in bed, Mildred tells Montag that Clarice was ran over by a car. And also Montag decides to hide the book that he got from the woman's house underneath his pillow. The next morning, Montag says he's sick and won't go to work. Captain Beatty then stops by and has a talk with Montag and tells Montag how the profession started. After the Civil War, motion pictures, radio, and TV started taking over, and books started becoming simpler and smaller. As the population started getting bigger and books shortened, a bigger population meant more people became offended by books, and they dwindled down to comics, confessions, and trade journals. And as they're talking, Mildred decides to feel under Montag's pillow and finds the book. Before Beatty leaves them, he tells Montag that every fireman gets an itch to read a book, but after 24 hours the fireman has to bring it or the fireman will. After Beatty leaves, Montag confronts Mildred and he shows her the collection of books he's been hiding. She freaks out because books are illegal and she doesn't want to go to jail. And then Montag starts reading the books.
So, part 2, the side in the sand. When Faber predicts the end of society and suggests they not get involved, Montag insists they should make preparations to rebuild when the time comes. When Faber remains reluctant, Montag tears pages out of the Bible and threatens to destroy it. Faber finally gives in, saying he will meet with an unemployed printer to begin producing copies of the few books they possess. Montag asks Faber for help, and the professor reveals he has constructed a tiny two-way radio that Montag can fit into his ear. Later, while obtaining money to pay the printer, Montag discusses faith with Faber. After the discussion, Faber reads the Book of Job to Montag. Montag reads poetry to Mildred and her friends, and although they fight and protest, he forces them to sit and listen to him. As Montag reads, he begins to understand what Clarice meant when she said that she knew the way that life is to be experienced. The poem causes Mrs. Phelps great distress, and once the women leave, Montag finds himself alone. Little did he know, Beatty's dog was sniffing around his house. Montag then hides his books outside in the bushes. At the firehouse, Montag turns a book into Beatty, who quotes Shakespeare to him. Beatty confronts Montag, attempting to overwhelm him with quotes in order to demonstrate how bad books are. After Beatty has had his say, the alarm bell rings, and Beatty drives them to the next assignment, which is found out later to be Montag's home.
The third and final part of the book was called Burning Bright, and it starts with Montag staring at Clarice's house, and Beatty belittles Montag as he stares at it and placing him under arrest. And Beatty kind of belittles Montag and kind of eggs him on, and Montag was threatening to kill him, but Beatty really didn't care. So he then burns Beatty with his flamethrower. And the two other firemen there, they didn't really do anything about it, but Montag knocked them out anyway, because Beatty was quoting Julius Caesar to Montag. Montag goes on the run, and then war is then declared. He meets with Faber to tell him what happened, and he gives Montag instructions on where to go. He was supposed to find a river in particular, and so on the count, everything was under surveillance there. So at the count of 10, everyone was to open their doors and look for Montag, but before that, Montag reaches the river before the Hound can reach him. The Hound also represents kind of like the people in their society. It's like, it's breathing, but it's not really alive. Then after floating down the river so the Hound wouldn't catch his scent, he washes up on a countryside.
Bless you.
And he finds the railroad tracks and follows them that Faber, after he washed up on the river to find the train tracks. And he started thinking as he was walking down the train tracks that Clarice once walked them to. Before he got to the river, he washed like soot off his face in a gas station, and then he was almost hit by a car. And he realizes there was a group of people in the car, and it was a group of teenagers that just didn't care if they were going to hit him or not. So he thinks that those were the people that killed Clarice too, and they just simply did not care. And then he's greeted by the 5 men sitting in a fire, which is Granger and his fellow hobo intellectuals. And in the countryside, Montag feels like alive. He feels like a whole person for once in his life. Then the 4 other men introduce themselves to Montag. They're like former professors. Even though they're homeless, they're like very clean people. And Granger shows them the TV of an innocent man being killed, and the media portrays him as Montag, saying that it's all over, they found him, and they killed him. He also drinks like a liquid to change like his sweat so the scent wouldn't be tracked. And during that, he says like the countryside doesn't feel real, and he was thinking about like Mildred now. He doesn't really like care about her, and he was thinking about the sun, and he says the sun burns time, saying that everything that you've worked for, the sun kind of burns that away. And Granger says to him like, welcome back to life. And as a gift, he gives them the book of, I don't know how to say it. It's like Ecclesiastes. And the Granger says someday there will be another dark age. So they think they were put there to help others get through another dark age that's coming. And the city is then bombed and mostly destroyed. At this time, like I said, there was no like real like location that was said, but Montag didn't know where him and his wife met. He couldn't figure it out for the life of him. But when this happened, he realized they met in Chicago. That was the only city that was mentioned. And they kind of they decided to return to to the city and help survivors rebuild. And that's our works cited page.